Widow Eleanor Reed shocked the entire town when she spent her husband's life insurance money on the dilapidated Oakwood Valley Farm at the county auction. But what she discovered in the crumbling West Wing left federal investigators speechless. A hidden room, sealed for decades, contained evidence that would finally solve the notorious Blackwell disappearance that had stumped authorities for generations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The October rain fell in steady sheets as Eleanor Reed stood beneath a black umbrella at the edge of the overgrown lavender field. She watched county officials hammer auction signs into the muddy ground along the fence line of what had once been the crown jewel of Oakwood Valley, each metal stake puncturing. The earth seemed to mark another chapter, closing in the farm's storied history. Oakwood Valley Farm had sat abandoned for nearly 5 years. The once magnificent 95-acre property with its sprawling Victorian farmhouse, 3 barns, and renowned lavender fields had descended into a state of haunting decay after the Blackwell family's financial collapse. The foreclosure had been the talk of Riverdale County for months, a shocking fall from grace for one of the area's oldest and most prestigious families. Eleanor had driven past the property countless times during her commute to the local library, where she worked as the head archivist. She'd always admired the elegant lines of the farmhouse, even as it gradually surrendered to neglect. There was something compelling about its weathered dignity, a silent resilience that resonated with her own experience of enduring despite loss. "Mom, are we seriously considering buying an entire farm?" asked her 18-year-old daughter Amelia, approaching from behind. Her voice sounded small against the vast landscape, the question hanging in the damp air between them. Eleanor tucked a strand of her silver-streaked auburn hair behind her ear and wrapped her arm around her daughter's shoulders, unable to find the right words immediately. Her son James, 22, joined them, his expression a mixture of concern and barely concealed curiosity. "I brought coffee," James said, offering them each a thermos cup, a simple gesture trying to normalize what was, by any reasonable standard, an outlandish plan. "Did you speak with Mrs. Hargrove at the bank?" he asked after a moment, his eyes carefully studying his mother's face. "What did she say about the loan application?" Eleanor sighed, the weight of reality settling more firmly on her shoulders. She was kind, but not optimistic. "My income from the library isn't enough to qualify for the size of loan we'd need, even with the insurance money as a down payment." 4 years as a widow after Richard's sudden heart attack had left Eleanor financially vulnerable. Between helping James through college, supporting Amelia's upcoming university plans, and maintaining their modest suburban home on a librarian's salary, her savings had dwindled to concerning levels. The $185,000 life insurance payout was all she had left to build some kind of financial security for their future. "We've looked at smaller properties," Eleanor said, her eyes scanning the dilapidated farmhouse with its peeling paint and sagging porch. "This is the only one with enough land and existing structures to possibly generate the kind of income that could support us long-term." The auctioneer expected the starting bid to be around $220,000, a testament to how far the once grand property had fallen from its appraised value of nearly $900,000 in better days. But the remote location, years of neglect, and the persistent rumors about the property's troubled history had made it a liability rather than an asset for potential buyers. "But what if we don't get it?" Amelia asked, leaning into her mother's side. "Then we continue as we are," Eleanor replied, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "The suburban house is perfectly fine. But this place—" She didn't finish the thought. This place had sparked something in her from the moment she'd seen the auction listing. Despite the rotting wood, cracked windows, and fields choked with weeds, Eleanor had felt an inexplicable connection, almost a calling. Perhaps it was the lavender fields that, despite years of neglect, still sent their faint perfume into the air on warm days. Or maybe it was the determined wisteria that had climbed across the west wing, its woody vines somehow enhancing rather than diminishing the beauty of the old structure. Whatever it was, Oakwood Valley represented more than just a potential business opportunity to Eleanor. It represented possibility, renewal, and perhaps most importantly, purpose after years of simply going through the motions of living. The farmhouse itself seemed to bear the weight of untold stories. Its Victorian architecture, once the pride of the county with its ornate gables and wraparound porch, now stood as a fading reminder of more prosperous times. The Blackwell family had owned the property for over a century, making their fortune first in timber, then transforming the land into one of the most productive lavender farms in the region. Their abrupt financial collapse and subsequent disappearance from public life had been as mysterious as it was sudden. Jonah Blackwell, the last owner, had simply stopped appearing in town one day. Bills went unpaid, hired hands were let go without explanation, and eventually the bank had foreclosed. The most peculiar aspect was that no one had seen any of the Blackwells move out. They had simply vanished, leaving behind furniture, clothing, and personal items, as if intending to return at any moment. "I heard Greystone Development is sending representatives to the auction," said Helen, Eleanor's colleague from the library, who had arrived with a folder of printouts about lavender farming. "They've been buying up all the foreclosed historical properties in the county and replacing them with those cookie-cutter luxury housing developments." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back and to the story. Eleanor felt a knot form in her stomach. The thought of bulldozers tearing through the heritage lavender fields or demolishing the historical farmhouse with its unique architectural elements made her physically ill. She'd spent her career preserving historical records and artifacts. The idea of this piece of living history being erased was particularly painful. The Historical Society tried to get the property designated as a landmark, Helen continued, but without access to fully document the historical elements, and with the Blackwell family unavailable to provide historical records, the petition stalled in committee. That night, after Helen left and the children went to bed, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by printouts, loan rejection letters, and the auction listing. She traced her finger over a photograph of Oakwood Valley from its heyday. Lavender fields in full bloom, the farmhouse freshly painted, the Blackwell family standing proudly on the front steps for a magazine feature on agricultural innovation. In 1975, the article had quoted Jonah Blackwell, "This land has been in my family for generations. We don't just farm it, we're custodians of its legacy. There are stories in these fields, in the walls of this house, that deserve to be remembered." Eleanor found herself wondering what stories those walls might hold, and whether she was truly prepared to take on the responsibility of preserving them. The financial calculations before her were daunting. Even if she somehow managed to purchase the property with her insurance money and the small loan she'd secured from Riverdale Credit Union, the rehabilitation costs would be enormous. The lavender fields would need to be rejuvenated. The house would require extensive repairs. The barns would need structural work before they could be safely used. And all of this would have to happen while she continued working at the library to keep food on the table and pay the property taxes. "Maybe this is crazy," she whispered to the empty kitchen. "Maybe I'm chasing an impossible dream." "Dad would have loved this idea," came James's voice from the doorway, startling her. Eleanor looked up to see her son leaning against the doorframe. his tall frame silhouetted against the hallway light. With each passing year, he resembled Richard more strongly, the same thoughtful eyes, the same quiet confidence. "Your father was always the one who took risks," she said, a sad smile forming. "I was the one who insisted we have contingency plans." "Maybe it's time for you to take a page from his book," James suggested, sitting down across from her. "You've spent 4 years taking care of us, making sure we stayed on track after Dad died. Maybe this is your chance to build something for yourself." His words struck a chord. For 4 years, Eleanor had focused entirely on stability, maintaining normalcy for her children, ensuring James could finish college, preparing for Amelia's education. The idea of reaching for something more, something that ignited her passion rather than just met basic needs, seemed almost foreign now. "The lavender fields alone could be viable," James continued, pointing to one of the printouts. "Professor Martinez in my agricultural business class says lavender products are booming. Essential oils, culinary ingredients, bath products. And with the historical angle, you could develop tours or events focused on the property's past." Eleanor studied her son's earnest face, seeing a maturity that both impressed and saddened her. 22-year-olds shouldn't have to worry about agricultural market trends or their mother's financial security. "When did you get so grown up?" she asked softly. James shrugged. "Around the same time you started carrying all our worry alone." The statement wasn't accusatory, just matter of fact, but it still pierced Eleanor's heart. Her children had been forced to mature quickly after Richard's death. Perhaps this farm, this seemingly impossible project, could give all of them something hopeful to work toward together. As dawn broke on auction day, Eleanor stood in front of her bedroom mirror, applying mascara with slightly trembling hands. She rarely bothered with makeup for her job at the library, but today she needed every ounce of confidence she could muster. "You can do this," she told her reflection. "The worst that happens is you don't get the farm, and life continues as before." But as she said the words, she realized how much she had invested emotionally in the idea of Oakwood Valley becoming their home and livelihood. The thought of returning to their suburban routine after today made her chest tighten with preemptive disappointment. The drive to the auction site was quiet. James stared out the window, occasionally checking the business plan he'd drafted on his laptop. Amelia fidgeted with her camera, planning to document the day regardless of the outcome. When they arrived, Eleanor was surprised by the number of vehicles already parked along the gravel driveway leading to the farmhouse. At least 30 people milled about on the overgrown lawn in front of the house, a mix of locals in practical attire, curious neighbors, and a small cluster of men and women in business suits who stood slightly apart, checking their phones and speaking quietly into Bluetooth earpieces. Helen waved from near the registration table where Eleanor needed to provide identification and proof of funds to receive a bidder's number. The librarian had closed the research desk for the morning so staff could attend, a gesture of support that nearly brought Eleanor to tears. "Your cheering section is here," Helen said, gesturing to where several library patrons and colleagues stood. "Mrs. Finch even contributed $50 to your fund, said to add it to your bid because she wants someone to preserve Jonah's lavender varieties." As Eleanor completed the registration process, a sleek black SUV pulled up, and 3 more people in. Expensive business attire emerged, carrying tablets emblazoned with the Greystone Development logo. "That's Maxwell Turner," Helen whispered, nodding toward a distinguished-looking man in his 50s. "Regional Director for Greystone. If he's here personally, they're serious about this property." Eleanor's heart sank. How could she possibly compete with a development company? She looked down at her bidder's card, number 42, and wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. At precisely 10 a.m., the auctioneer called everyone to attention. The crowd quieted as he outlined the terms of the sale: cash or pre-approved, financing only, 10% deposit due immediately, closing within 45 days, and the property sold as is, with no warranties expressed or implied. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today for the public auction of the property known as Oakwood Valley Farm, 95 acres with Victorian farmhouse, 3 barns, outbuildings, and established lavender fields. Due to foreclosure proceedings, bidding will start at $220,000. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. This was it. Her insurance money of $185,000 wouldn't be enough for the full purchase, but combined with the small loan she had secured, she could bid up to $250,000. Beyond that, she had no options. $220,000. Do I have $220,000? Eleanor raised her bidder's card, her hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. She was aware of James and Amelia standing close on either side of her, their presence both a comfort and a reminder of what was at stake. I have $220,000 from bidder number 42. Do I hear $230,000? Almost immediately, Maxwell Turner from Greystone raised his card. $230,000. $230,000 from bidder number 17. Do I hear $240,000? Eleanor raised her card again. The next few minutes passed in a blur of rising numbers. $240,000, $250,000. Each time Eleanor bid, Turner countered smoothly, without hesitation or emotion, as if they were bidding on a used car, rather than what Eleanor hoped would be her family's future. At $250,000, Eleanor's stomach clenched. She was at her absolute limit. When Turner bid $260,000, she kept her card lowered, her chest tight with disappointment. $260,000 from bidder number 17, going once. Amelia looked up at her, eyes welling with tears. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," Eleanor whispered, "going twice." The auctioneer's gavel hovered in the air. Eleanor felt a peculiar numbness spreading through her body, a defense mechanism against the crushing disappointment. $270,000. The voice came from behind them, clear and authoritative. The crowd turned to see who had spoken. A woman in her 70s with immaculate silver hair and a tailored pantsuit raised her bidder's card, number 8. Maxwell Turner looked momentarily surprised before recovering and raising his own card. $280,000. $300,000, the silver-haired woman counted without hesitation. A murmur ran through the crowd. The property in its current condition wasn't worth much more than $250,000, according to most local assessments. The bidding was now entering territory that defied conventional economic sense. As Turner consulted briefly with his colleagues, Eleanor studied the woman who had entered the bidding so unexpectedly. There was something vaguely familiar about her, though Eleanor couldn't place where she might have seen her before. $310,000, Turner said, his voice slightly less confident than before. $350,000, the woman responded immediately. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Turner spoke urgently into his Bluetooth earpiece, his expression growing increasingly frustrated. Finally, he shook his head at the auctioneer. $350,000 going once, going twice. The auctioneer scanned the crowd for any additional bids. Finding none, he brought down his gavel with a sharp crack. Sold to bidder number 8 for $350,000. The tension drained from Eleanor's body, leaving behind a hollow ache. She had allowed herself to hope, to dream, and now she needed to face reality again. She put on a brave smile for her children. "We'll find something else," she promised, though the words felt empty, even to her own ears. As the crowd began to disperse, Eleanor gathered her courage to approach the woman who had won the auction. It seemed only right to congratulate her and perhaps learn a little about her plans for the property that had, however briefly, occupied such a significant place in Eleanor's dreams. "Excuse me," Eleanor said as she approached. "I just wanted to say congratulations on your purchase." The silver-haired woman turned, studying Eleanor with keen blue eyes that missed nothing. "Thank you. You're Eleanor Reed, aren't you? Head archivist at the Riverdale Library. 2 children recently. Researching historical lavender cultivation and Victorian architecture." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "How do you know all that?" "Small town," the woman replied with a slight smile. "And I make it my business to know who's interested in properties I'm considering. I'm Victoria Montgomery." She extended her hand. Eleanor shook it, finding the grip firm and direct. "It's a remarkable property, or it could be with some work." "It certainly could," Victoria agreed, looking past Eleanor to where James and Amelia stood watching them curiously. "Those are your children?" "Yes, James and Amelia," Eleanor said, gesturing for them to join her. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "Tell me, Ms. Reed, why were you interested in Oakwood Valley Farm? It's hardly an obvious choice for a widow with 2 college-aged children." The question might have seemed intrusive from someone else, but Victoria's tone held genuine curiosity rather than judgment. "It's difficult to explain," Eleanor admitted. "From the first time I saw it, I felt a connection. The historical significance, especially. I've spent my career preserving historical documents and artifacts. The idea of restoring this property, of bringing its stories back to life, resonated deeply." She hesitated before adding, "And honestly, it was one of the few properties with enough potential to possibly create a sustainable income. At least I thought it was within reach." Victoria's expression softened slightly. "And what would you have done with 95 acres and a Victorian farmhouse that needs significant rehabilitation?" "We had plans," James interjected, stepping forward. "Mum's researched the history of lavender cultivation in this region. We were going to restore the fields, develop botanical products, and eventually open the house for historical tours focusing on the agricultural heritage of the county." Eleanor glanced at her son in surprise. They had discussed these possibilities, but she hadn't realized how enthusiastically he had embraced them. "Ambitious," Victoria commented, but without sarcasm. "And what about the West Wing?" "It needs substantial, structural work. We were going to stabilize it first, then restore it room by room," Amelia piped up. "I've been studying architectural preservation in my senior project. The West Wing has unique Victorian craftsmanship that's increasingly rare." Victoria smiled at the young woman's enthusiasm. "You've done your homework. The craftsmanship is indeed exceptional, particularly in the rooms that haven't been modernized." As Maxwell Turner from Greystone Development approached, clearly intending to speak with Victoria, she held up a hand to forestall him. "Mr. Turner, I'll be with you shortly." Turner retreated, looking somewhat annoyed at being dismissed. Victoria turned back to Eleanor. "I have a proposition for you, Ms. Reed. Would you and your children join me for lunch at the Riverdale Inn? I'd like to discuss something with you." Confused but intrigued, Eleanor nodded. "Of course." "Excellent," Victoria said. "I'll meet you there in 30 minutes. As they walked toward their respective vehicles, James leaned close to his mother. "What do you think she wants?" "I have no idea," Eleanor admitted, "but I guess we're about to find out." The drive to the Riverdale Inn was filled with speculation. Amelia wondered if Victoria might want to hire them as caretakers for the property. James theorized that perhaps she wanted Eleanor's historical expertise, given her library background. Eleanor herself tried to keep her expectations firmly in check. Whatever Victoria Montgomery wanted to discuss, it wouldn't change the fundamental reality. Oakwood Valley Farm would not be theirs. When they arrived at the inn, Victoria was already seated in a private dining room, several folders and a legal pad on the table before her. She looked up as they approached, gesturing for them to join her. "I've ordered tea," she said, "and lemonade for Amelia. The owner mentioned it's your preference." Amelia's eyes widened at this personalized attention from a stranger. "Thank you." Once they were settled, Victoria didn't waste time on small talk. "I'll be direct, Miss Reed. I purchase and restore historical properties throughout this region. Typically, I rehabilitate them to their original condition, document their historical significance, and either maintain them as educational sites or sell them to carefully vetted buyers who appreciate their heritage." "You outbid Greystone," Eleanor observed. "They're not accustomed to losing," Victoria acknowledged. "Their business model depends on acquiring properties like Oakwood Valley, demolishing anything of historical value, and replacing them with generic developments that maximize profit per square foot while erasing the architectural and agricultural heritage of the region." Her passion was evident, reminding Eleanor of her own protective instincts toward the historical documents in her care. "So you're a preservationist?" Eleanor asked. "In a sense," Victoria replied. "Not the type who wants to freeze everything in amber. I believe in respectful restoration that honors the past while ensuring these properties remain viable for future generations." She paused, studying Eleanor carefully. "Which brings me to why I wanted to speak with you." She opened one of the folders and slid a document across the table. "This is a proposal for a rather unconventional arrangement regarding Oakwood Valley Farm. I'd like you to read it carefully." Eleanor stared at the document Victoria had placed before her, a mixture of confusion and cautious hope taking hold. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for it, unsure what to expect. This was turning into the strangest day of her life. First losing the auction for what she'd hoped would be her family's home and business, and now sitting across from the mysterious winner who seemed to know an unusual amount about her. "Take your time," Victoria said, signaling to the waiter for more tea. The proposal was typed on formal letterhead, Montgomery Heritage Foundation, and as Eleanor began reading, her confusion only deepened. Victoria Montgomery wasn't simply proposing to sell her the farm. She was offering a partnership, a restoration project, and what amounted to a complete career change all at once. James leaned against his mother's shoulder, reading along silently. Amelia fidgeted with her napkin, too young to understand the legal language, but sensing the importance of the moment nonetheless. "I don't understand," Eleanor finally said, looking up from the document. "You want me to live at Oakwood Valley and manage its historical restoration as your employee?" Victoria shook her head. "Not as an employee, as a partner. My foundation would retain ownership of the property itself, but you would have a 99-year lease with an option to purchase after 5 years. You would own the lavender business you create there outright. The foundation would provide initial capital for restoration, equipment, and materials." "Why me?" Eleanor asked bluntly. "You don't know me. I'm a librarian with no experience in property restoration, a widow with barely enough savings to make the minimum bid on a foreclosed property." Victoria's expression softened. "Sometimes the right experience isn't found on a resume, Ms. Reed. You've spent your career preserving historical records and artifacts. You understand the value of heritage and have the research skills to document it properly. Your interest in lavender cultivation shows initiative and genuine passion." She took a sip of her tea before continuing. "More importantly, you see Oakwood Valley for what it could be, not just what it is now. That vision is rarer than you might think." Eleanor glanced at her children, noting James's barely contained excitement and Amelia's wide-eyed wonder. This seems too good to be true, she said cautiously. What's the catch? Victoria smiled slightly. Direct. I appreciate that. She leaned forward. Here's the catch, as you put it. The work will be intensive. Restoring that house, rehabilitating the fields, documenting the property's history. It's not for the faint of heart. You'll work harder than you ever have at the library, with no guaranteed outcome. I'm not afraid of hard work, Eleanor replied. I know, Victoria said simply. That's why we're having this conversation. Before Eleanor could respond, the inn's door opened, and Maxwell Turner from Greystone Development entered, scanning the room until his gaze landed on their table. His expression tightened as he approached. Ms. Montgomery, he said without acknowledging the others. I'd like to discuss the Oakwood Valley property. Greystone is prepared to make you a generous offer, $450,000 cash, immediate closing. Victoria didn't even look up from her tea. The property is not for sale, Mr. Turner, as I believe I made clear at the auction. Turner's professional demeanor slipped slightly. You're making a mistake. That property is strategically located for our Riverdale Heights development. The projected return on... Mr. Turner, Victoria interrupted, finally looking at him. I'm having lunch and a private business discussion. Your offer is declined. The amount is irrelevant. The developer's face flushed. You can't seriously intend to restore that derelict farmhouse. The rehabilitation costs alone would be none of your concern, Victoria finished for him. Good day, Mr. Turner. For a moment it seemed Turner might argue further, but something in Victoria's steady gaze made him reconsider. With a tight nod, he turned and left, the door closing firmly behind him. He'll be back, Victoria commented, returning her attention to Eleanor. Greystone has purchased 8 properties in this county in the past year. They're piecing together land for a massive development. Oakwood Valley's location and water rights make it particularly valuable to them. Eleanor looked down at the proposal again. And stopping them is part of why you're doing this. One of many reasons, Victoria acknowledged, but not the primary one. My interest is in preserving architectural and agricultural heritage. Countering irresponsible development is a happy side effect. Their food arrived, cucumber sandwiches for the adults, and a club sandwich for Amelia. As they ate, Victoria outlined more details of her proposal. The foundation would provide $225,000 for restoration and business development over 3 years. Eleanor would need to submit quarterly reports and adhere to certain preservation guidelines. She would retain creative control over the business. Direction, as long as it centered on the property's historical aspects. The main part of the house is habitable now, Victoria added. It needs cosmetic work, but the systems are sound. You could move in within 3 weeks. Mom, this is perfect, Amelia said, unable to contain her enthusiasm. It's exactly what we wanted. Slow down, Eleanor cautioned, though she felt the same excitement bubbling up inside her. There's a lot to consider. Such as, Victoria prompted. For starters, my job. I can't just leave the library and hope the lavender business produces immediate income. The funding includes a modest living stipend for the first year, Victoria pointed out. After that, the business should begin generating revenue, especially with the historical tours and botanical products. Eleanor tapped the paper with her finger. This mentions restoring the West Wing first. That's going to be the most challenging part of the property. The West Wing is the most historically significant section, Victoria countered. It contains architectural elements that aren't found in the rest of the house, and according to the original plans, it was the first part built in 1875. She studied Eleanor's expression. You're looking for problems, Ms. Reed. That's not necessarily bad. It shows you're taking this seriously. But sometimes an opportunity comes along that defies conventional caution. Amelia, who had been quiet until now, looked up from her sandwich. "Mom, remember what Dad always said before his photography expeditions? The best views come after the hardest climbs." Eleanor felt her breath catch. Richard had indeed said that often, usually before embarking on one of his adventure photography trips. It was both comforting and painful to hear his words from their daughter's mouth. "Your husband sounds like a wise man," Victoria observed gently. "He was," Eleanor said softly. "He would have loved Oakwood Valley." She squared her shoulders. "I need to think about this. It's not just my decision. It affects all of us." "Of course," Victoria said, sliding a business card across the table. "Take the weekend. Look over the proposal carefully. Visit the property again. I've instructed the caretaker to give you full access. Call me on Monday with your decision." As Victoria prepared to leave, she hesitated. "One more thing, Ms. Reed. While the business aspects of this arrangement are important, they're not why I chose you for this opportunity." "Why did you then?" Eleanor asked. "Because when you looked at that rundown farm, you didn't see problems. You saw stories waiting to be preserved and shared. That kind of vision can't be taught." With that, Victoria left, the door closing softly behind her. The weekend passed in a blur of research, discussions, and 2 more visits to Oakwood Valley Farm. Eleanor brought a contractor friend to assess the house's condition. She called the Agricultural Extension Office to discuss lavender cultivation. She created spreadsheets, budgets, and business projections until her eyes burned from staring at her laptop screen. On their Sunday visit, as James and Amelia explored the property, Eleanor found herself drawn to the west wing again. Despite its dilapidated condition, there was something compelling about the original structure. Hand-carved moldings, intricate parquet floors, built-in cabinets crafted by someone who clearly took pride in their work. In what had once been a study, Eleanor noticed something odd, a slight difference in the wood pattern of the wainscoting near the marble fireplace. Kneeling, she ran her fingers along the seam where the patterns changed. "Find something interesting?" came a voice from the doorway. It was Thomas Garrett, the caretaker Victoria had mentioned. "Maybe," Eleanor said, looking up. "The wood grain pattern changes here. Was there a repair at some point?" Thomas, a weathered man in his 60s, crossed the room and knelt beside her with surprising agility for his age. "Good eye," he said. "That's not a repair, though. That's a hidden panel." "A what?" Thomas grinned, pressing firmly on one decorative element in the wainscoting. To Eleanor's astonishment, a section of the paneling clicked and swung inward, revealing a small door. "The Blackwells were known for their secrets," Thomas said, his eyes twinkling with the pleasure of showing off this hidden feature. "This house has several such panels and compartments. This one leads to a small room behind the study." Eleanor peered into the darkness beyond the door, her archivist's heart racing at the prospect of an untouched historical space. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the opening. "That's why Ms. Montgomery gave you access," Thomas replied, producing a flashlight from his pocket. "She mentioned you might find some of the home's original features interesting." Eleanor took the flashlight and carefully made her way through the small door. Beyond was a narrow passage that opened into a room about 8 feet square. As the beam of light swept across the space, she gasped. Unlike the rest of the house, this room appeared untouched by time or decay, its contents perfectly preserved, as if sealed in a time capsule. A roll-top desk stood against one wall, still covered with papers. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with leather-bound volumes. A filing cabinet occupied a third wall, its drawers partially open. Most remarkably, the walls themselves were covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and hand-drawn maps, all connected by red string like something from a detective novel. "Thomas," she called, her voice barely above a whisper, "you need to see this." The caretaker joined her, his expression shifting from casual interest to astonishment as he took in the room's contents. "I've worked for Ms. Montgomery for 15 years, helped her restore a dozen properties," he said slowly. "I've never seen anything like this. This room hasn't been opened in decades." Eleanor moved carefully to the desk, examining the papers without touching them. They appeared to be notes, correspondence, and what looked like investigation reports. One name appeared repeatedly: Catherine Blackwell. The Catherine Blackwell case. Eleanor breathed, the implications suddenly dawning on her. This must have been Jonah Blackwell's investigation room. Thomas nodded slowly. That would make sense. Jonah was obsessed with his grandmother's disappearance. It was the family mystery. Catherine Blackwell vanishing without a trace in 1952, leaving behind her husband and young son. Eleanor knew the story. Everyone in the county did. Catherine Blackwell, the beautiful and vibrant matriarch of the Blackwell family, had gone missing one summer evening. No body was ever found, no ransom demanded, no evidence of what had happened. To her, the case had become one of the region's most enduring mysteries, spawning countless theories, from the mundane to the supernatural. Jonah must have been conducting his own investigation, Eleanor said, carefully examining the wall of connected evidence. These news clippings go back to the original disappearance, but these notes are much more recent. He was actively working on this when... She trailed off, the implications becoming clear. When the Blackwells had mysteriously abandoned the property 5 years ago, Jonah had left behind this hidden room full of evidence about his grandmother's disappearance. "We need to contact Victoria right away," Eleanor said, her historians' training taking over, "and possibly the authorities. If there's evidence here about an unsolved disappearance, it needs to be properly documented and preserved." As Thomas left to make the call, Eleanor continued to carefully examine the room's contents. The center of the evidence wall featured a large map of the county, with several locations circled in red. Notes attached to each location contained dates, times, and cryptic observations. One location, an abandoned quarry about 20 miles from the farm, was circled repeatedly with the notation J.M. Primary written beside it. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. J.M. could only be James Morrison, the business partner of Catherine's husband, who had also disappeared shortly after Catherine, supposedly moving to Arizona. For decades, rumors had circulated that Morrison had been involved in Catherine's disappearance, but nothing had ever been proven. As she turned to examine the filing cabinet, Eleanor noticed a small safe tucked beneath the desk, its door ajar. Inside was a single item, a weathered leather journal with the initials KB embossed on the cover. Catherine Blackwell's personal journal. With trembling hands, Eleanor carefully opened the journal to its final entry, dated the day before Catherine's disappearance. Eleanor's heart pounded as she carefully turned the delicate pages of Catherine Blackwell's journal. The final entry sent chills through her body. June 15th, 1952. "I found the ledgers. James has been embezzling from the business for years, using offshore accounts. When confronted, he threatened me, said no one would believe a hysterical woman over him. He doesn't realize I've made copies of everything. Tomorrow, I'll take them to Robert at the bank. If anything happens to me, J.M. is responsible. The proof is in the East Garden, beneath the stone angel." Eleanor stared at the words, their implications striking her like a physical blow. This wasn't just a historical curiosity. This was evidence in an unsolved disappearance, potentially a murder. "Ms. Reed," Thomas called from the doorway. "Ms. Montgomery is on her way. She said not to touch anything else until she arrives." Eleanor nodded, carefully closing the journal and replacing it exactly where she'd found it. "We need to contact the sheriff, too." This room contains evidence about Catherine Blackwell's disappearance, evidence that was never investigated. Thomas's eyes widened. After all these years... Eleanor stepped back from the desk, her mind racing with the implications of what they'd discovered. For decades, Catherine Blackwell's disappearance had been one of the county's most enduring mysteries, the subject of countless speculations ranging from voluntary disappearance to alien abduction. The truth, it seemed, was far more mundane and tragic, a business partner's betrayal and likely murder to cover up financial crimes. "Mom?" Amelia's voice echoed from the main part of the house. "Where are you?" "In here," Eleanor called, moving to the hidden doorway. "I found something extraordinary." When James and Amelia joined her in the secret room, their reactions mirrored her own astonishment. James immediately began photographing everything with his phone, careful not to disturb any items, while Amelia stood transfixed before the wall of connected evidence. Jonah Blackwell was investigating his grandmother's disappearance, Eleanor explained, pointing to the various elements on the wall. And he was close to solving it. Look at these quarry notations and the map coordinates. He'd figured out where her body might be. But if he was so close to solving it, why did he abandon everything? James asked, zooming in on a photograph of Catherine Blackwell standing beside a tall, distinguished man labeled JM in faded ink. Eleanor had been wondering the same thing. Something must have happened, something that made him leave suddenly without taking any of this with him. Or someone made him leave, Amelia suggested quietly. The thought hung in the air, disturbing in its plausibility. If James Morrison had indeed murdered Catherine Blackwell to cover up embezzlement, and if Jonah had been close to proving it, could Morrison or his descendants have threatened Jonah? Victoria Montgomery arrived 40 minutes later, accompanied by Sheriff Daniel Hodges, a serious man in his 50s whom Eleanor knew from community events. Victoria's usual composure faltered momentarily as she stepped into the hidden room, her sharp eyes taking in the preserved evidence. "Remarkable," she breathed. When the restoration assessment noted possible hidden architectural elements, "I never imagined this." Sheriff Hodges moved carefully around the small space, his trained eye cataloguing details. "This is now potentially a crime scene," he said. "We'll need to bring in forensic specialists to document everything properly." Eleanor explained what they'd found, showing him Catherine's journal and its final damning entry. "The stone angel she mentions," Victoria said thoughtfully. "That would be in the family cemetery on the east side of the property. It was once an ornate garden, though it's overgrown now." The sheriff nodded. "We'll need to investigate that area immediately." He turned to Thomas. "Has anyone disturbed that part of the property recently?" "Not that I'm aware of," the caretaker replied. "That section has been completely neglected for years. The undergrowth is thick enough that you can barely see the gravestones." As law enforcement officers arrived to secure the scene, Eleanor, her children, Victoria, and Thomas relocated to the main part of the house. The kitchen, though dusty, provided enough clean space for them to sit while official statements were taken and arrangements made for a thorough investigation of both the hidden room and the family cemetery. "Did you know about this when you purchased the property?" Sheriff Hodges asked Victoria directly. She shook her head. "I knew the house had historical significance and likely contained architectural secrets. Most Victorian homes of this caliber do, but I had no idea about a hidden investigation room. My interest was in preserving the architectural elements and agricultural heritage." The sheriff turned to Eleanor. "And you found this by accident?" "Yes," she confirmed. "I noticed an irregularity in the wainscoting pattern. Thomas showed me how to open the panel, but he hadn't known about the room before today either." As the day progressed, the property transformed from a quiet, abandoned farm to a hive of activity. Crime scene technicians carefully documented and removed items from the hidden room. A team with ground-penetrating radar equipment headed to the overgrown cemetery. News vans began appearing at the property gates, held back by deputies as word spread about a potential break in the county's most famous cold case. Through it all, Eleanor found herself drawn deeper into the mystery and, surprisingly, into a partnership with Victoria that felt increasingly natural. Victoria's extensive experience with historical properties complemented Eleanor's archival knowledge perfectly as they helped investigators understand the context of various documents found in the hidden room. By evening, as the initial furor died down, and most of the officials departed, leaving only a security detail to guard the property overnight, Victoria invited Eleanor and her children to join her on the relatively intact front porch. Thomas brought them coffee and sandwiches, a simple meal that tasted extraordinary after the intensity of the day. "This certainly accelerates our timeline," Victoria said, surprisingly calm given the day's revelations. "The historical significance of the property has just increased exponentially." Eleanor nodded, watching the last of the forensic team's vehicles disappear down the driveway. The Catherine Blackwell mystery has been part of this county's identity for generations. If it's finally solved because of what we found today, it would bring closure to many people, Victoria finished for her. And it would certainly put Oakwood Valley at the center of significant public interest. James, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "Does this change your offer to Mom about the partnership and restoration?" Victoria smiled slightly. "Not in the way you might think. If anything, it strengthens my conviction that your mother is exactly the right person to help preserve this property's legacy." She turned to Eleanor. "Your background in archival preservation led you to discover that hidden room when others had missed it for decades. That's precisely the kind of insight this project needs." Eleanor felt a strange mixture of excitement and trepidation. The day's events had transformed a potential business venture into something far more significant. They were now part of potentially solving a historical mystery, bringing truth to light after decades of speculation. "I don't need until Monday," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I accept your offer." Victoria's expression warmed. "I was hoping you might say that." The next morning dawned clear and cool, the autumn light casting long shadows across the overgrown gardens of Oakwood Valley Farm. Eleanor had barely slept, her mind replaying the previous day's discoveries and contemplating the enormous change her family was undertaking. They had stayed overnight in the main part of the farmhouse, the sheriff suggesting it was better not to advertise their connection to the case by returning to their suburban home where reporters might be waiting. The farmhouse, despite its neglected state, had a solid, welcoming quality that Eleanor found oddly comforting. The rooms were spacious, with high ceilings and large windows that filled the space with golden morning light. She could envision how it would look restored, the original woodwork refinished, the walls freshly painted in historically accurate colors, the floors sanded and polished to reveal their intricate patterns. Sheriff Hodges arrived shortly after breakfast, his expression revealing news before he spoke. "We found something," he said without preamble. "Exactly where Catherine's journal indicated, beneath the stone angel in the family cemetery." Eleanor and Victoria exchanged glances. "Human remains?" Victoria asked quietly. The sheriff nodded. "A skeleton buried in what appears to be a shallow grave that was later landscaped over. The forensic anthropologist estimates it's been there for approximately 70 years, which matches the timeline of Catherine's disappearance. We'll need DNA testing for absolute confirmation, but the location matches exactly what was described in her journal," Eleanor finished. "There's more," he continued. "We found a metal box buried with the remains. It contained documents, ledgers, and financial records showing systematic embezzlement from Blackwell Enterprises by James Morrison over a period of years. It appears Catherine hid the evidence where she thought it would be safe, but never got the chance to reveal it to anyone. The implications were both disturbing and profound. Catherine Blackwell had apparently been murdered to prevent her from exposing Morrison's crimes. Her body hidden on her own property, and the truth buried for 70 years. "What about Jonah Blackwell?" James asked. His investigation seemed to be pointing to the quarry, not the family cemetery. And why did he disappear 5 years ago, leaving all his evidence behind? The sheriff's expression grew more troubled. "That's the other development. Based on information found in the hidden room, we obtained a warrant to search the abandoned quarry property. This morning, using cadaver dogs, we found human remains there as well, much more recent, estimated at 5 to 6 years old." A chill ran through Eleanor. "You think Jonah was killed because he was getting close to the truth about his grandmother?" "It's a working theory," Sheriff Hodges confirmed. "The quarry property has been owned by Morrison Holdings LLC since the 1960s. The current CEO is Edward Morrison, James Morrison's grandson." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Edward Morrison is also the primary investor in Greystone Development." The connection clicked into place like the tumblers of a lock. Edward Morrison, through Greystone, had been aggressively trying to acquire Oakwood Valley Farm, the very property that contained evidence of his grandfather's crimes. If he had indeed silenced Jonah Blackwell when the investigation got too close to the truth, he would have had every reason to want the farm demolished and its secrets buried forever beneath a modern housing development. The sheriff nodded grimly. "We've obtained warrants for Edward Morrison's home, offices, and financial records. The FBI has been brought in due to the cross-generational nature of the crimes and potential financial fraud implications." As the day progressed, the story broke across local and then national news. By afternoon, Oakwood Valley Farm had become the center of a media storm, with reporters clustered at the property gates and helicopters occasionally passing overhead for aerial footage. Eleanor, watching the frenzy from the relative peace of the farmhouse porch, felt a surreal detachment from it all. Just days ago, she had been a widow and librarian with modest dreams of starting a small business. Now she was at the center of what was being called one of the most remarkable cold case breakthroughs in decades. "Are you having second thoughts?" Victoria asked, joining her on the porch with 2 cups of tea. Eleanor considered the question carefully. "Not about the partnership or the restoration," she said finally. "But I never anticipated being part of something this significant. The attention is overwhelming." Victoria nodded, understanding. "It will fade eventually. The media cycle moves on quickly these days, but the historical importance of what happened here, that will endure. Which is precisely why preserving this property matters even more now," Eleanor realized aloud. "It's not just an architectural treasure or a potential business. It's a piece of living history, a place where truth was both hidden and ultimately revealed." Victoria smiled approvingly. "Exactly." Later that afternoon, as forensic teams continued their work in the cemetery and investigators processed the evidence from the hidden room, Eleanor received an unexpected visitor. A sleek black car pulled up to the farmhouse, and Maxwell Turner from Greystone Development emerged, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Thomas escorted him to the porch, where Eleanor and Victoria were reviewing preliminary restoration plans. "Ms. Reed, Ms. Montgomery," Turner began formally, "I've come to officially withdraw Greystone's interest in this property." Eleanor exchanged glances with Victoria, whose expression remained carefully neutral. "In light of recent developments," Turner continued, "our board has determined that this project no longer aligns with our development objectives. Furthermore, I want to personally clarify that Greystone had no knowledge of Edward Morrison's personal motivations regarding this property. Distancing yourself from a potential murder suspect seems prudent, Victoria observed coolly. Turner's jaw tightened. Greystone Development operates with complete transparency and ethical standards. Morrison's investment was purely financial. He had no input on acquisition targets or strategy. Yet you pursued this property with unusual aggression, Eleanor noted, offering well above market value despite its condition. At Morrison's urging, though we didn't understand why at the time, Turner admitted reluctantly. He's been removed from the board, effective immediately. After Turner departed, Victoria turned to Eleanor with a slight smile. One obstacle removed. Greystone won't be trying to develop around us now. The negative publicity alone would devastate their sales. Over the next several days, the Catherine Blackwell case captivated the region. Forensic analysis confirmed the remains found in the cemetery were indeed Catherine's, while DNA testing was still underway on the body found at the quarry. Edward Morrison had been arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including obstruction of justice and financial fraud, with murder charges pending as the investigation continued. Amidst the ongoing legal drama, Eleanor began the practical work of transitioning her life. She submitted her resignation to the library, arranged for their suburban home to be rented rather than sold, and worked with Victoria to develop a detailed restoration plan for Oakwood Valley. We should start with the West Wing, Victoria suggested, spreading architectural drawings across the farmhouse dining room table, not just because of its historical significance, but because it now has documented importance to the Blackwell case. Eleanor nodded agreement. The hidden room will need special consideration. Once the investigation is complete, we should preserve it exactly as Jonah left it, perhaps as part of historical tours focusing on the case. An excellent idea, Victoria approved. The public fascination with this story will continue for years. Properly managed, it could provide substantial support for the overall restoration project. James and Amelia had thrown themselves enthusiastically into various aspects of the project. James was developing marketing plans for both the lavender, business, and potential historical tours, while Amelia had begun documenting the property's architectural features with photographs and detailed notes. 1 week after the discovery, Eleanor stood in the lavender fields as the sun set over Oakwood Valley. The overgrown plants still released their fragrance when disturbed, promising renewal with proper care. From this vantage point, she could see the graceful lines of the Victorian farmhouse silhouetted against the twilight sky. Despite its weathered condition, the property possessed an undeniable dignity, a resilience that spoke of stories remembered and preserved across generations. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Victoria approaching along the garden path. "Taking a moment of peace?" the older woman asked, her voice understanding. Eleanor nodded. "Trying to absorb everything that's happened, it still seems unreal sometimes." "Transformational moments often do," Victoria observed, "but they reveal what we're capable of when challenged." They stood in companionable silence, watching as the first stars appeared above the ancient oaks that lined the property's eastern boundary. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," Eleanor said finally. "Why did you really choose me for this project? There must have been other potential partners with more experience in property restoration or agricultural business." Victoria considered the question carefully before answering. "Experience can be acquired. Vision and integrity are inherent." She gestured toward the farmhouse. "When I saw you at the auction, I recognized something familiar. Someone who sees beyond present condition to essential worth." She paused, then added more quietly, "I grew up in a house very much like this one. My family lost it during financial hardships in the 1970s. It was demolished to make way for a shopping centre. Understanding dawned on Eleanor. Victoria's passion for historical preservation wasn't merely professional, it was deeply personal. "That loss shaped you," she observed. Victoria nodded. "It taught me that once these places are gone, they can never truly be recovered. Their stories, their craftsmanship, their connection to our shared past, all lost irretrievably." The revelation added another dimension to their partnership. This wasn't just a business arrangement or even a restoration project. It was a shared commitment to honoring and preserving the connections between past and present. As they walked back toward the house, Victoria hesitated, then said, "There's one more thing you should know. Something I discovered in my research about this property that may be significant given recent events." Eleanor looked at her expectantly. Catherine Blackwell wasn't just any society woman. Before her marriage, she worked as a code breaker during World War II. She had a remarkable mind for patterns and hidden information. Victoria's eyes reflected the last light of sunset. Perhaps that's why she was able to uncover Morrison's embezzlement when others missed it. And perhaps that's why Jonah was so determined to solve her disappearance, Eleanor added. He inherited her persistence, along with her talent for investigation. The next morning, Eleanor received an unexpected call from Sheriff Hodges. "Miss Reed, is Ms. Montgomery with you? I have information you both should hear." Victoria joined Eleanor in the farmhouse study, where they placed the call on speaker. "DNA tests have confirmed the remains at the quarry belong to Jonah Blackwell," the sheriff began without preamble. "And we've found evidence directly linking Edward Morrison to his death." "What kind of evidence?" Eleanor asked. "Emails and financial records showing Morrison tracked Jonah's investigation. And a witness, Morrison's personal assistant, has agreed to testify that he ordered the destruction of evidence at Oakwood Valley after Jonah's death. They were planning to enter the property to search for the hidden room, but the bank foreclosed before they could arrange it. So they tried to buy it legitimately through Greystone," Victoria concluded. "And when that failed because I outbid them, they tried to purchase it from me." "Exactly," the sheriff confirmed. "The assistant claims Morrison was becoming increasingly desperate to acquire the property before anyone discovered what Jonah had found." After the call ended, Eleanor sat quietly processing the information. The tragedy of the Blackwell family had spanned generations. Catherine murdered to conceal financial crimes, and decades later, her grandson Jonah suffering the same fate for attempting to uncover the truth. "The restoration of this property isn't just about preserving architecture or agricultural heritage anymore," she said finally. "It's about honoring the Blackwells' pursuit of truth, giving them the justice they deserved." Victoria nodded solemnly, "A worthy purpose for our work here." 2 weeks later, as they prepared for the official start of restoration work on the West Wing, Eleanor officially moved her family to Oakwood Valley Farm. Their possessions looked almost comically modern against the Victorian backdrop of the farmhouse, but the space already felt more like home than their suburban house ever had. The media attention had begun to subside, focusing now on Edward Morrison's legal proceedings rather than the farm itself. This allowed Eleanor and Victoria to concentrate on the detailed work of planning the restoration and future business operations. That evening, as twilight settled over the property, Eleanor found James and Amelia on the front porch, sharing ideas about lavender products and historical tour themes. Their enthusiasm was contagious, their faces animated in a way she hadn't seen since before Richard's death. "Mom, come look at this concept for the tour brochures," Amelia called, holding up her laptop. The design featured a stylized image of the farmhouse with the tagline, "Oakwood Valley Farm, where history reveals its secrets." Eleanor smiled at her daughter's creativity. "It's perfect." As she joined her children on the porch, Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of embarking on a journey with purpose and meaning. This restoration project would honor not just the architectural and agricultural heritage of Oakwood Valley, but also the courageous individuals who had sought truth despite the cost. The farmhouse behind them stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, its weathered dignity a testament to stories preserved and secrets finally revealed. Whatever challenges lay ahead in restoring this historic property, Eleanor knew they were part of something larger than themselves. A reclamation not just of a physical place, but of truth long buried beneath decades of deliberate concealment. Victoria joined them on the porch, carrying a tray with 4 glasses of lemonade. A toast, she suggested, to new beginnings and old truths. As they raised their glasses, Eleanor added quietly, "And to Catherine and Jonah Blackwell, whose pursuit of truth will finally be honored." The light faded from the sky, but the historic farmhouse stood strong against the gathering darkness, its windows glowing with welcoming light, no longer abandoned, no longer concealing secrets, but beginning a new chapter as a place where history would be respected, preserved, and shared with generations to come. The next morning dawned with renewed purpose as contractors arrived to begin the delicate work of stabilizing the West Wing. Eleanor had spent hours with the architectural preservationist, identifying original elements that must be preserved and distinguishing later modifications that could be sensitively updated. "The hidden room will require special handling," the preservationist noted, examining the concealed doorway with professional admiration. This mechanism is a remarkable example of Victorian craftsmanship. Once the forensic team had finished documenting and removing evidence, Eleanor planned to restore the room exactly as Jonah had left it, preserving not only its architectural significance, but also its historical importance as the place where a decades-old mystery had finally begun to unravel. As she walked the contractors through the West Wing, pointing out areas of particular historical value, Eleanor was struck by how quickly she had adapted to this new role. Just weeks ago, she had been cataloguing historical documents in the library's climate-controlled archive room. Now she was actively preserving history in its original context, breathing new life into a property that had nearly been lost to time and deliberate destruction. Victoria joined them midway through the tour, adding insights from her extensive experience with similar restoration projects. The 2 women worked in seamless partnership, their different backgrounds and expertise complementing each other perfectly. "You've taken to this remarkably well," Victoria observed later, as they reviewed material samples in what would eventually become the farm's business office. "As if you were always meant to be doing this work." Eleanor considered this. "Perhaps I was. The library preserved documents and artifacts, but this," she gestured to encompass the farmhouse around them, "this preserves context and living history. The stories here aren't just recorded, they're embedded in the very structure." By afternoon, the property hummed with purposeful activity. Architectural specialists measured and documented original features. Landscape experts assessed the lavender fields, identifying heritage varieties worth preserving. In the main part of the house, Amelia directed a small team clearing out decades of dust and neglect, carefully distinguishing between valuable historical items and mere debris. James had set up a makeshift office in the dining room, coordinating with local media about an eventual opening and developing a website that would chronicle the restoration process while building anticipation for future tours and lavender products. As Eleanor observed this transformation, not just of the property but of her family, she felt a profound sense of rightness. The risks she had taken in pursuing this opportunity, in completely changing their lives, were already revealing unexpected rewards. Her children weren't just participating in the project, they were thriving. applying their unique talents and discovering new capabilities. That evening, as the workers departed and quiet settled over Oakwood Valley Farm, Eleanor sat on the front porch steps with a cup of tea, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering twilight. The farmhouse behind her, though still in need of extensive work, already felt more like home than anywhere she'd lived since Richard's death. "You look peaceful," came Victoria's voice as she joined Eleanor on the steps. "I am," Eleanor replied, surprising herself with the realization. Despite everything, the murder investigation, the massive restoration project completely changing our lives, I feel more centered than I have in years. Victoria nodded, understanding. "Because you're doing something that matters, not just to you and your family, but to history, to this community, to the memories of Catherine and Jonah Blackwell." They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Victoria added, "The most meaningful projects are rarely the easiest ones. They're the ones that demand everything from us, our skills, our courage, our vision, and in return, they give us purpose." As darkness settled fully over Oakwood Valley Farm, lights glowed warmly from the farmhouse windows, no longer empty and abandoned, but filled with life and purpose once again. The secrets hidden within its walls had finally found voice, and the truth, buried for so long, had risen to bring both justice and renewal. The hidden room that had preserved evidence for decades would soon become part of a new chapter in the property's story, not a place of concealment, but a place of revelation, where visitors would learn about persistence, courage, and the enduring power of truth finally brought to light. 3 months after Eleanor Reed discovered the hidden room at Oakwood Valley Farm, the autumn leaves had given way to winter's first snowfall. The gentle blanket of white transformed the property into a scene from a Victorian postcard, softening the edges of the ongoing restoration work and highlighting the elegant proportions of the farmhouse against the pale landscape. Inside, the transformation was equally remarkable. The main section of the house now gleamed with restored hardwood floors, freshly painted walls in historically accurate colors, and carefully preserved original features. The kitchen had been sensitively updated with modern appliances that somehow didn't clash with the Victorian architecture, and the formal parlor had been fully restored to its 1890s grandeur. "It's hard to believe this is the same place we first saw at the auction," James remarked, helping Eleanor hang evergreen garlands along the grand staircase in preparation for their first public event, a holiday open house that would introduce the community to their restoration progress. Eleanor stepped back to admire their work. "It's still very much a work in progress, but yes, the difference is remarkable." The west wing, containing the hidden room that had changed everything, remained under careful restoration, with architectural preservationists meticulously documenting and restoring each historical detail. The room itself had been officially released by law enforcement after all evidence was processed and was now being prepared as the centerpiece of planned historical tours. In the 3 months since their discovery, the case against Edward Morrison had progressed rapidly. He now faced multiple charges, including 2 counts of murder, obstruction of justice, and financial crimes spanning decades. His trial was scheduled for spring, with prosecutors confident in their case, based on the evidence found at Oakwood Valley and subsequent investigations. The media frenzy had gradually subsided, though national publications still occasionally requested interviews or updates. Eleanor had become surprisingly comfortable with this aspect of their new life, recognizing that sharing the Blackwell story served the broader purpose of their restoration project, connecting people with history in meaningful ways. "Mom, the lavender centerpieces are ready," called Amelia from the dining room, where she was arranging dried lavender harvested from the heritage plants they'd carefully rescued from the overgrown fields. Though full restoration of the fields would wait until spring, They had managed to salvage enough of the original plants to create beautiful arrangements and test products for their future business. Eleanor joined her daughter, admiring the elegant centerpieces that would adorn tables during the open house. Amelia had discovered an unexpected talent for botanical arrangements, combining lavender with winter greenery and vintage ribbons found in the farmhouse attic. "These are stunning," Eleanor praised. "You've got a real gift for this." Amelia beamed at the compliment. "I found some old photographs in the library archives showing how the Blackwells decorated for their holiday gatherings. In the 1930s, I wanted to honor that tradition." This thoughtful connection between past and present epitomized their approach to Oakwood Valley's restoration. Rather than simply preserving the physical structures, they were reviving the property's living heritage, the traditions, knowledge, and stories that had shaped it through generations. Victoria Montgomery arrived shortly before noon, bringing additional evergreen boughs from her own estate and a stack of freshly printed brochures for the open house. "These look wonderful," Eleanor said, examining the materials that featured James's photography and Amelia's design work. The brochures highlighted both the historical significance of Oakwood Valley and their plans for its future as a working lavender farm and historical destination. "Your children have remarkable talents," Victoria observed. "James has a photographer's eye that captures both detail and emotion, and Amelia's design sensibility manages to be both historically respectful and contemporary." Eleanor nodded proudly. "They've both flourished here in ways I couldn't have predicted. James has deferred his graduate school applications to stay involved with the restoration, and Amelia is now talking about studying architectural preservation rather than general business." "The property has affected all of you," Victoria noted. "As the best historical places always do, they don't just sit passively in the past, they actively shape those who care for them." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Thomas, who entered with a stack of mail and a mysterious wooden crate. "Special delivery from the County Historical Society," he announced, setting the crate on the recently restored library table. "They found these items in their archives and thought they should return to Oakwood Valley, especially given recent developments." Eleanor opened the crate carefully, gasping softly as she removed its contents. Inside were Blackwell family photographs, journals and correspondence that had been donated to the Historical Society decades ago, a treasure trove of personal history that added rich context to the property they were restoring. "Look at this," she said, holding up a sepia-toned photograph of Catherine Blackwell standing proudly in the lavender fields, her easy confidence radiating across the decades. "This must have been taken shortly before her disappearance." "There's a note on the back," Victoria observed. Eleanor turned the photograph over to find faded handwriting. "June 1952. Our best harvest yet. Catherine Blackwell, innovator of the Blackwell Blue Lavender Hybrid." "Blackwell Blue," Amelia repeated. "That must be the unusual lavender variety we found in the northeast corner of the field, the one with the distinctive color and stronger fragrance." James, who had been sorting through the materials, held up a small notebook. "Look at this. Catherine's cultivation notes for developing that hybrid. She was essentially conducting botanical research decades before it was common for women to be recognized in such fields." Each item from the crate revealed another layer of the Blackwell family story, painting a picture of Catherine as not merely a victim in a tragic murder case, but as a remarkable woman whose innovations and intelligence had shaped Oakwood Valley long before her untimely death. "This changes our restoration focus slightly," Eleanor said thoughtfully. "We should put more emphasis on preserving her botanical legacy, not just the architectural elements and murder mystery." Victoria nodded approval. The most compelling. Historical preservation always connects to human innovation and achievement, not just to tragedy. Catherine's story deserves to be remembered for her contributions, not just for how her life ended. As they continued exploring the historical materials, they came across a folder containing newspaper clippings about Catherine's wartime work as a code breaker, carefully worded due to security restrictions, but hinting at significant contributions to the Allied effort. No wonder she was able to decode her business partner's embezzlement scheme, Eleanor remarked. She had been trained to find patterns others missed. The discovery of these materials, just days before their first public event, seemed providential, offering a more complete and nuanced understanding of the remarkable woman whose legacy they were preserving. Eleanor immediately began adjusting their presentation materials to highlight Catherine's achievements alongside the mystery of her disappearance. The holiday open house, scheduled for the following evening, would be their first opportunity to share Oakwood Valley's evolving story with the community. Though the restoration was far from complete, Eleanor and Victoria had agreed that inviting the public to witness the process would build invaluable support and interest for the project. By evening, as final preparations were underway, a light snow began falling again, adding to the magical atmosphere. Eleanor stood at the library window, watching the gentle flakes illuminate in the outdoor lighting they'd recently installed along the main pathways. "Penny for your thoughts," came Victoria's voice as she joined Eleanor by the window. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in such a short time," Eleanor replied. 3 months ago I was a widow and librarian struggling to find direction. Now I'm leading a historical restoration project, helping solve a famous murder case and building a new business. It doesn't seem quite real sometimes." Victoria smiled. "Transformation rarely happens gradually. In my experience, it tends to come in dramatic shifts after periods of seeming stagnation. You were ready for this change. You just needed the right catalyst." "Oakwood Valley was that catalyst," Eleanor agreed. "Or perhaps discovering that hidden room was." "I think it was something within you," Victoria suggested. "The willingness to see potential where others saw only decay. To recognize that beneath the peeling paint and overgrown fields lay something worth fighting for." Their reflective moment was interrupted by Thomas announcing the arrival of Sheriff Hodges, who had requested a brief meeting before the next day's event. The sheriff entered, removing his hat as he stepped into the warmth of the restored library. "Ms. Reed, Ms. Montgomery," he greeted them. "I wanted to update you personally on some developments in the case." Eleanor gestured toward the comfortable chairs gathered near the fireplace. "Please, join us." Once they were seated, Sheriff Hodges continued, "The FBI has expanded their investigation into Morrison Holdings' activities over the past 50 years. They've uncovered evidence suggesting that Edward Morrison's father, and possibly Edward himself, were involved in suppressing information about Catherine Blackwell's murder for decades." "How so?" Victoria asked. "Financial records show regular payments to several former county officials from the 1950s through the 1990s, the sheriff explained. "And we've found correspondence suggesting that when Jonah Blackwell began investigating his grandmother's disappearance, Morrison used his influence to obstruct that investigation at every turn." Eleanor processed this information, understanding its implications for their historical narrative. So it wasn't just 2 isolated murders 70 years apart. It was a continuous effort to conceal the truth, spanning generations. The sheriff nodded grimly. "The corruption appears to have infected local government for decades. Several former officials are now under investigation, and we're reviewing dozens of cases that may have been influenced by Morrison money." "How does this affect the upcoming trial?" Victoria inquired. "It strengthens the prosecution's case considerably," Sheriff Hodges replied. What began as a murder trial has expanded into one of the most significant corruption investigations in the state's history. And it all started with what you found in that hidden room. After the sheriff departed, Eleanor sat quietly by the fire, contemplating this latest revelation. What they had discovered wasn't just evidence of two murders. It was the thread. That, when pulled, was unraveling a complex web of corruption that had influenced the county's development for generations. "Are you all right?" Victoria asked, noticing Eleanor's pensive expression. "Just thinking about how far-reaching the consequences of truth can be," Eleanor replied. "When Catherine documented that embezzlement, when Jonah pursued his investigation, when we found that hidden room, none of us could have anticipated how many layers of deception would ultimately be exposed." Victoria nodded, understanding. Truth has a power that transcends time. Catherine's careful documentation 70 years ago is still speaking, still bringing light to darkness. The next day dawned clear and cold, perfect weather for their holiday open house. By early afternoon, the farmhouse was ready, festooned with evergreen garlands, twinkling lights, and Amelia's beautiful lavender arrangements. Historical displays had been set up in the restored rooms, highlighting both the architectural features and the human stories connected to the property. The hidden room, though still under restoration, had been carefully prepared for limited viewing. A temporary walkway allowed visitors to see into the space without disturbing the ongoing preservation work, while informational panels explained its significance in solving the Blackwell mystery. In the dining room, tables displayed prototype lavender products they planned to develop. Sachets, essential oils, culinary herbs, and botanical soaps, all featuring the distinctive Blackwell blue variety Catherine had pioneered decades earlier. "It's showtime," James announced as the first cars began arriving promptly at 4 p.m. "Ready, Mom?" Eleanor took a deep breath, smoothing the front of her emerald green dress, a rare concession to festivity that Amelia had insisted upon. "As ready as I'll ever be." The response exceeded their most optimistic expectations. Over the next 3 hours, more than 200 community members toured the property, expressing genuine enthusiasm for both the restoration work and the plans for Oakwood Valley's future. Local historical society members were particularly moved by the care being taken to preserve the property's authentic character while adapting it for contemporary use. Eleanor found herself continuously engaged in conversations about everything from Victorian architecture to lavender cultivation to the Blackwell case. To her surprise, she handled these interactions with growing confidence, discovering a natural ability to connect historical details with the personal interests of her visitors. "You're a natural at this," Victoria observed during a brief quiet moment. "The way you're weaving together the architectural history, botanical elements, and the Blackwell story, it's engaging everyone from history buffs to gardening enthusiasts." Eleanor smiled. "I think all those years at the library, helping people connect with information that mattered to them, was better preparation for this than I realized." As twilight deepened outside the windows, the farmhouse glowed with warmth and light, its restored elegance enhanced by holiday decorations and the animated conversations of visitors. Several local business owners approached Eleanor with potential partnership ideas. The artisanal soap maker interested in featuring their heritage lavender, the boutique hotel owner inquiring about future tour packages, the local chef asking about culinary lavender for his restaurant. "We're creating something that resonates beyond just historical preservation," Eleanor realized aloud to Victoria as they observed the enthusiastic interactions. "We're reconnecting this property to the community in ways that benefit everyone. That's the most sustainable form of preservation," Victoria agreed. "When a historical property becomes vital to the present community rather than simply a monument to the past." By the event's conclusion, Eleanor was exhausted but exhilarated. The positive response confirmed what she had intuitively felt from the beginning. Oakwood Valley had significance beyond its architectural features or even its connection to a famous mystery. It represented something essential about their communities, identity and heritage that people longed to preserve and celebrate. After the last visitors departed and the family gathered in the kitchen for a well-deserved late dinner, James presented a surprise, a guest book filled with comments from the evening's visitors. "I thought you might want to see these," he said, sliding the leather-bound book across the table to Eleanor. The comments moved her deeply. Beyond the expected compliments about the restoration work, many visitors had shared personal connections to Oakwood Valley, memories of visiting the lavender fields as children, family stories about Catherine, Blackwell's generosity during difficult times, gratitude for preserving a piece of local history that might otherwise have been lost forever. One entry particularly caught Eleanor's attention. "My grandmother always said Catherine Blackwell was ahead of her time, in her business acumen, her scientific curiosity, and her refusal to be limited by convention. Thank you for ensuring her true legacy won't be forgotten." "This is why what we're doing matters," Eleanor said, looking up at her children and Victoria. "We're not just solving a mystery or restoring old buildings. We're reclaiming Catherine's rightful place in this community's history, not as a victim, but as a visionary." The following weeks brought continued progress on both the restoration and the developing business plan. With winter fully established, outdoor work focused on planning rather than implementation, mapping the lavender fields for spring rehabilitation, designing garden paths that would highlight historical aspects of the landscape, drafting specifications for restoring the Victorian greenhouse they'd discovered beneath decades of overgrown vegetation. Inside the farmhouse, restoration continued room by room, with the west wing receiving particular attention. The hidden room had been stabilized, and its contents carefully preserved, with plans to open it as part of guided tours once the full restoration was complete. Eleanor had established a comfortable routine, dividing her time between restoration supervision, historical research, and business development. Her resignation from the library had been accepted with reluctant understanding, though she maintained close connections with her former colleagues, who often provided valuable research assistance for the Oakwood Valley project. One snowy afternoon in January, as Eleanor worked in the recently restored study organizing Catherine Blackwell's botanical notes, she was surprised by an unexpected visitor. Thomas showed in an elegant woman in her 60s, introducing her as Margaret Blackwell Hayes, Jonah Blackwell's daughter, and Catherine's great-granddaughter. "I've been overseas for several years," Margaret explained after introductions. "When I read about what happened here, about my father and great-grandmother, I knew I needed to come see for myself." Eleanor led her through the house, showing both the completed restoration work and the ongoing projects. Margaret moved through the spaces with visible emotion, occasionally touching original features or pausing before family photographs they had discovered and displayed. "It's strange," she said as they entered the west wing. "I visited this house as a child when my grandfather was still alive, but I never knew about the hidden room or my father's investigation. He seems to have kept his work very private," Eleanor observed gently, "perhaps to protect you and others from what he discovered." Margaret nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "That would have been like him. He was always protective, always concerned with doing what was right." She hesitated before adding, "When he disappeared, everyone assumed he'd had a breakdown after the financial collapse and had simply left to start over somewhere else. I never fully believed that, but I had no way to prove otherwise." When they reached the hidden room, now carefully preserved behind protective glass, Margaret stood silently for several minutes, taking in the wall of evidence her father had assembled, the photographs, maps, notes, and connections he had meticulously documented in his determination to solve his grandmother's disappearance. "He never gave up," she whispered. "All those years, everyone else had accepted that we would never know what happened to her, but he kept searching. He found the truth," Eleanor said softly. "And because of his persistence, justice is finally being served for both of them." Later, over tea in the dining room, Margaret shared family stories that added rich texture to their understanding of both Catherine and Jonah. She described her great-grandmother's determination to succeed in the male-dominated business world of the 1940s and 50s, and her father's quiet but unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth about the family's tragic history. "What you're doing here," Margaret said, gesturing to encompass the restored farmhouse around them, "it honors them both in the most meaningful way possible. You're not just preserving buildings, you're preserving their legacy of courage and integrity." Before departing, Margaret made an unexpected offer. "I have family items in storage, photographs, letters, personal effects that belong to both my great-grandmother and my father. They should be here as part of the story you're telling. Would you be interested in having them?" Eleanor was momentarily speechless at the generosity of this offer. "We would be honored," she finally managed. "Our goal is to present the fullest, most accurate picture of your family's contributions to this community." After Margaret left, promising to arrange for the items to be shipped, Eleanor found Victoria in the library reviewing architectural plans for the spring restoration of the greenhouse. "We just had the most remarkable visitor," Eleanor began, sharing details of Margaret's visit and her generous offer of family artifacts. Victoria listened attentively, then observed, "This is what authentic preservation inspires. It draws people into participation, encourages them to contribute to a living history rather than simply observe it. It feels like pieces are coming together in ways I never could have orchestrated," Eleanor admitted. Margaret's visit, the materials from the Historical Society, the community's response to the open house, it's all creating a momentum beyond anything I imagined when we started this project. "Because you're approaching it with genuine respect," Victoria pointed out, "not as a commercial venture primarily, but as a sacred trust. People respond to that authenticity." The conversation was interrupted by James calling from the doorway. "Mom, you need to see this." They followed him to the dining room, where he had set up his laptop. "I just received an email from Professor Martinez at the university. He's analyzed those soil samples we sent from the lavender fields, and he's discovered something extraordinary about the Blackwell blue variety. On screen was a detailed analysis showing that the distinctive lavender hybrid Catherine had developed possessed unusual properties, significantly higher concentrations of certain beneficial compounds than typical lavender varieties, making it potentially more valuable for both aromatic and medicinal applications. According to Professor Martinez, this variety represents a significant botanical achievement," James explained. "He believes it could be marketed as a premium product, with unique properties, exactly the kind of cornerstone we need for building the business." Amelia, who had joined them midway through James's explanation, immediately grasped the implications. So Catherine wasn't just growing lavender, she was systematically improving it through selective breeding. She was essentially conducting agricultural research decades before women were commonly recognized in scientific fields, and creating something of genuine value in the process, Eleanor added. "This discovery expands our understanding of her contributions even further." Victoria smiled appreciatively. "Every layer we uncover reveals more about her remarkable mind and vision. How fitting that her botanical innovation may help sustain the property's future, just as her courage in documenting financial crimes has finally brought truth to light after 70 years. As evening settled over Oakwood Valley, Eleanor stood at the study window, watching snow swirl gently around the Victorian lampposts they'd restored along the main drive. The farmhouse around her, though still a work in progress, had already transformed from an abandoned relic to a vibrant center of historical significance and new purpose. The hidden room that had started their journey had yielded far more than evidence in a long, cold case. It had become the catalyst for reclaiming Catherine Blackwell's complete legacy, not just as a murder victim, but as a codebreaker, botanical, innovator, and woman of remarkable courage who had stood against corruption regardless of personal risk. In choosing to preserve this property, in refusing to allow its story to be bulldozed beneath generic development, Eleanor had discovered not just a new purpose for herself and her family, but a deeper understanding of how individual courage ripples across generations. Catherine's meticulous documentation, Jonah's persistent investigation, and their own determination to honor the truth had combined to finally bring justice and recognition long overdue. Outside, the snow continued falling softly on the lavender fields where, beneath winter's protective blanket, Catherine's botanical legacy waited for spring, ready to bloom again under the careful stewardship of those who understood its value and significance. Some truths can be buried, Eleanor murmured to herself, but with enough care and persistence they eventually find their way into the light. Spring arrived at Oakwood Valley Farm with an explosion of renewal that transformed the landscape. Almost overnight, the lavender fields, carefully tended through the winter months, now showed promising signs of vigorous growth. Delicate green shoots pushed through the earth in orderly rows, where Eleanor and her team had meticulously restored Catherine Blackwell's original planting design. 1 year had passed since the auction that had changed everything. Standing amid the emerging lavender plants on a perfect April morning, Eleanor took a rare moment to simply breathe and appreciate how far they had come. The farmhouse gleamed in the distance, its restored Victorian elegance a testament to careful preservation and respect for historical integrity. The West Wing, once in danger of collapse, now stood proud and structurally sound, its unique architectural features preserved for generations to come. "Contemplating your kingdom?" Victoria asked, approaching along the newly installed garden path that wound through the lavender fields. Eleanor smiled at her partner and mentor, just marveling at the difference a year makes. Last spring, this was all overgrown and abandoned. Now it's coming back to life with purpose. Much like its caretaker, Victoria observed with characteristic insight, "You've undergone quite a transformation yourself." This was undeniably true. The tentative widow who had nervously raised her auction paddle a year ago had evolved into a confident historical preservationist and business owner. Eleanor's knowledge of Victorian architecture, heritage plants, and historical restoration techniques had expanded exponentially through hands-on experience and dedicated study. More significantly, she had discovered leadership abilities she hadn't known she possessed, coordinating restoration teams, developing business strategies, and becoming the public face of Oakwood Valley's remarkable story. "The farm's grand opening is just 3 weeks away," Victoria reminded her. "Are you feeling prepared?" Eleanor nodded, falling into step with Victoria as they walked toward the farmhouse. "The restoration is on schedule. The initial product line is in production, and tour protocols are finalized. James has the website and marketing materials completed, and Amelia has the visitor center displays nearly finished." What had begun as a preservation project had evolved into a multifaceted enterprise. Oakwood Valley would soon open to the public as both a working lavender farm and a historical site, offering guided tours focusing on Victorian architecture, agricultural history, and of course, the famous Blackwell mystery that had captivated national attention. As they approached the farmhouse, Eleanor noted with satisfaction the freshly painted trim, restored porch railings, and meticulously repaired. Decorative elements that had once again made the structure the crown jewel of the valley. The landscape crew was putting finishing touches on the formal gardens near the house, replanting heritage varieties documented in Catherine Blackwell's journals and photographs. Inside, the transformation was equally impressive. The entrance, all gleamed with restored hardwood floors and historically accurate wallpaper recreated from fragments found during renovation. The grand staircase, once sagging and dangerous, now rose majestically to the upper floors, its intricate balusters and newel posts reflecting the craftsmanship of a bygone era. "Ms. Reed," called Thomas from the hallway. "The reporter from Historical. Holmes Quarterly has arrived for your interview." Eleanor checked her watch. "Right on time. Would you show her to the library? I'll join her in a moment." As Victoria excused herself to check on the greenhouse restoration, Eleanor took a brief moment to collect her thoughts. This interview would be published just before their grand opening, potentially reaching thousands of preservation enthusiasts and history buffs, exactly the audience they hoped to attract. The library, once a neglected room with water-damaged walls and buckling floors, had been meticulously restored to its original grandeur. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves now housed both the Blackwell family collection and carefully chosen volumes on Victorian architecture, agricultural history, and botanical science. The central table displayed Catherine Blackwell's journals and botanical notes under protective glass, allowing visitors to appreciate her scientific contributions without damaging the fragile original documents. "Ms. Reed, thank you for making time in your busy schedule," greeted Carolyn Winters, the magazine's senior writer. "I've been following Oakwood Valley's restoration with great interest. What you've accomplished in just 1 year is remarkable." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, gesturing toward comfortable chairs by the bay window, "though I can't take credit alone. This has been a collaborative effort involving dozens of skilled craftspeople, historical experts, and of course, my partner Victoria Montgomery and my children." As the interview progressed, Eleanor shared the farmhouse's architectural history, the challenges of authentic restoration, and the discoveries that had enhanced their understanding of the property's significance. She explained their approach to creating a sustainable business model that would support ongoing preservation while honoring the site's agricultural heritage. Of course, many of our readers are familiar with the sensational aspects of Oakwood Valley's story, Carolyn noted. The hidden room, the evidence that solved the Blackwell murder case, the subsequent arrest of Edward Morrison. How do you balance the property's legitimate historical significance with the public's fascination with true crime? It was a question Eleanor had anticipated. "We're committed to presenting Catherine Blackwell's complete legacy, not defining her or this property solely by the tragedy of her death. Our tours and educational materials emphasize her contributions as a botanical innovator, business leader, and wartime code breaker. The hidden room and its contents are presented in historical context, as evidence of both her courage in documenting corporate fraud and her grandson's determination to uncover the truth decades later." Carolyn nodded approvingly. "A thoughtful approach. And speaking of context, I understand Edward Morrison's trial begins next month. Will that affect your opening plans?" "Not directly," Eleanor replied. "While the legal proceedings will likely renew media interest in the Blackwell case, our focus remains on the property's broader historical significance and its future as a sustainable agricultural and educational enterprise." After the interview concluded and Carolyn departed with promises to send photographs of the magazine layout before publication, Eleanor continued her daily rounds of the property. In the former carriage house, now converted to production space, Staff were packaging the first commercial batches of Blackwell Blue lavender products, essential oils, sachets, culinary herbs, and botanical soaps that would form the cornerstone of their business model. "The initial orders have exceeded our projections," reported Olivia Chen, the experienced herbalist Eleanor had hired to oversee product development. That feature in Botanical Treasures magazine generated significant interest, especially from high-end spas and gourmet food shops. They're particularly drawn to the historical connection and the unique properties of Catherine's lavender variety. Eleanor examined the elegant packaging Amelia had designed, featuring a stylized silhouette of the Victorian farmhouse and Catherine Blackwell's signature from historical documents. "The presentation is beautiful. You've perfectly captured the blend of history and quality we're aiming for." In the main barn, now renovated as a visitor center, Amelia was directing the installation of educational displays, chronicling the farm's evolution from the 1870s through the present restoration. At 20, she had blossomed into a confident young woman with a passionate interest in historical preservation and a remarkable eye for design. "The timeline display is almost complete," she told her mother, gesturing toward a wall-mounted exhibit featuring photographs, documents, and artifacts arranged chronologically. "We've included everything from the original land grant to newspaper coverage of the Morrison trial." Eleanor admired the thoughtfully designed exhibit, noting how effectively it presented complex historical information in an engaging, accessible format. "You've done beautiful work here. Visitors will come away with a genuine understanding of this property's significance over time." "That's the goal," Amelia agreed, "to help people see beyond the sensational aspects to the deeper story of persistence and truth finally recognized." By late afternoon, as Eleanor completed her property tour in the West Wing, where final restoration work was underway in the hallway outside the hidden room, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Every aspect of the project was coming together with a coherence and purpose that exceeded her most optimistic early visions. The hidden room itself had been carefully preserved exactly as Jonah Blackwell had left it, now protected behind conservation glass that allowed visitors to view the space without endangering its contents. An adjacent room had been converted to a small theater where documentary footage explained the room's significance in solving the dual mysteries of Catherine and Jonah Blackwell's deaths. "Mom, got a minute?" James called from the end of the hallway. At 23, he had postponed graduate school indefinitely to serve as Oakwood Valley's business manager, discovering an entrepreneurial talent that had surprised everyone, including himself. "Always," Eleanor replied, joining him near the window that overlooked the lavender fields. "I've been reviewing the advance ticket sales for our opening month," he said, showing her the data on his tablet. "We're already at 80% capacity for all weekend tours, and the special events are completely sold out." Eleanor studied the numbers with satisfaction. "That's extraordinary for a new historical site. What's driving the special event bookings?" "The botanical afternoon tea is most popular, followed by the Victorian architecture masterclass," James reported. "But the Catherine Blackwell Beyond the Mystery lecture series is gaining momentum too, especially since we announced that Margaret will be participating." Margaret Blackwell Hayes had become an unexpected ally in their project, providing family photographs, letters, and personal insights that added immeasurable depth to their presentation of the Blackwell family story. Her willingness to participate in opening events, sharing memories of her father Jonah and family stories about her great-grandmother Catherine, had generated significant interest among history enthusiasts. "We've also had an inquiry from the university's Women in Science program," James continued. "They're interested in establishing an annual scholarship in Catherine's name, recognizing her contributions to botanical science. They've asked if we would host the award ceremony here each year. Eleanor felt a surge of emotion at this news. That would be perfect, recognizing her scientific legacy in the very place where she conducted her work. Let's make that happen. As the sun began its descent toward the western hills, casting golden light across the restored farmhouse and emerging lavender fields, Eleanor took a moment alone on the front porch. The property spread before her in all its renewed glory. No longer abandoned and forgotten, but vibrant with purpose and activity. Victoria joined her a few minutes later, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. "Admiring your handiwork?" she asked, handing Eleanor a glass. "Our handiwork," Eleanor corrected. None of this would exist without your vision and support." Victoria smiled, settling into one of the restored wicker chairs. "I provided opportunity. You provided the determination and heart that transformed opportunity into reality." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the last of the day's work crews departed and the property settled into evening tranquility. "I've received word from the prosecutor's office today," Victoria said finally. "They've added new charges against Edward Morrison based on evidence found in his private papers. It appears he was actively working to sabotage your bid for this property from the beginning, having your loan applications flagged for rejection, spreading rumors about structural problems to discourage potential buyers." Eleanor shook her head in amazement. He was that determined to bury the truth. Truth has a persistence that outlasts even the most determined efforts to conceal it, Victoria observed. Catherine documented evidence 70 years ago. Jonah pursued investigation despite threats. You discovered that hidden room despite financial obstacles deliberately placed in your path. At each point, someone chose truth over convenience or safety. The significance of these connections across time, these individual choices that had collectively resulted in justice, long delayed, never failed to move Eleanor. What had begun as a practical business venture had evolved into something far more meaningful, a reclamation not just of historical structures, but of truth itself. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of final preparations for the grand opening. Eleanor balanced oversight of last-minute restoration details with media interviews, staff training, and coordination with local officials for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Each day brought new challenges, but also new moments of satisfaction. As Oakwood Valley's transformation neared completion, 3 days before the scheduled opening, Eleanor received an unexpected visit from Sheriff Hodges. "I wanted to update you personally," he said as they walked the grounds together. "The FBI investigation has uncovered evidence suggesting Morrison's corruption extended even further than we initially believed. They found connections to several development projects throughout the county where environmental regulations were circumvented and historical preservation laws ignored, all with the complicity of officials he had compromised." "So the impact of what we discovered here continues to expand," Eleanor noted. The sheriff nodded gravely. Oakwood Valley may have been his most determined target because of its connection to Catherine's murder, but it appears he'd been using similar tactics for decades, destroying historical properties for profit with no regard for community heritage or environmental impact. This information added another dimension to the significance of their preservation work. In saving Oakwood Valley, they had not only preserved an architectural and agricultural treasure, but had also helped expose corrupt practices that had damaged the entire region for generations. "There's something else," Sheriff Hodges added as they approached the farmhouse. "We've located Catherine Blackwell's missing research notes, the ones mentioned in her final journal entry. Morrison had kept them all these years, apparently as a kind of insurance policy." Eleanor stopped walking, stunned by this revelation. After 70 years. "Are they intact?" Remarkably so, the sheriff confirmed. He kept them in a climate-controlled safe. The prosecutor has agreed to release them to the family once they've been fully documented for evidence. Margaret wants them to come here, to be part of your educational displays. The thought of reuniting Catherine's final scientific work with her restored home and fields seemed profoundly right, a completion of the circle, bringing her intellectual legacy back to the place where it had been created. On the morning of Oakwood Valley's grand opening, Eleanor rose before dawn, drawn to the lavender fields as first light touched the eastern horizon. The weather forecast promised a perfect spring day, warm and clear, ideal for the hundreds of visitors expected to attend the ribbon-cutting ceremony and inaugural tours. As she walked among the orderly rows of thriving lavender plants, some already showing hints of the distinctive bluish-purple blooms that had made Catherine's variety unique, Eleanor felt a deep sense of connection, not just to the land and buildings they had restored, but to the remarkable woman whose vision had shaped this place nearly a century ago. "I think she would be pleased," came Victoria's voice as she joined Eleanor in the field. "Not just with the physical restoration, but with how you've reclaimed her complete legacy." Eleanor nodded agreement. "That's what matters most, that people understand she was more than a victim in a sensational case. She was a scientist, an innovator, a woman of principle who stood against corruption regardless of personal risk. And now her story will inspire others," Victoria added, "particularly young women interested in science, agriculture, or historical preservation." As they returned to the farmhouse to prepare for the day's events, Eleanor found James and Amelia already busy with final arrangements. The transformation in her children over the past year had been as remarkable as the restoration of the property itself. They had discovered talents and passions that might have remained dormant without the challenges and opportunities Oakwood Valley had presented. By mid-morning, the property hummed with activity. Staff in historically inspired uniforms conducted final checks of tour routes and information stations. Local officials and special guests gathered on the front lawn where a podium and chairs had been arranged for the opening ceremony. Media representatives positioned cameras to capture the ribbon cutting against the backdrop of the beautifully restored Victorian farmhouse. As Eleanor prepared to address the gathered crowd, she caught sight of Margaret Blackwell Hayes, standing quietly near the front row, her dignified presence a living connection to the family whose legacy they were celebrating. "Thank you all for joining us on this momentous day," Eleanor began, her voice steady and confident as she surveyed the assembled guests. "1 year ago, Oakwood Valley Farm stood abandoned and at risk of destruction, its historical significance forgotten, its architectural treasures crumbling, its stories buried beneath decades of neglect." She gestured toward the gleaming white farmhouse behind her. "Today, thanks to the vision of the Montgomery Heritage Foundation and the dedicated work of countless skilled craftspeople, historians, and community supporters, Oakwood Valley begins a new chapter as both a living historical site and a working lavender farm." Eleanor continued, acknowledging the many contributors to the restoration project and outlining the educational and agricultural missions that would guide Oakwood Valley's future. She explained how visitors would experience not just Victorian architecture and agricultural history, but would also learn about Catherine Blackwell's scientific innovations and the remarkable story of truth finally revealed after 7 decades. "While the sensational aspects of the Blackwell case have drawn much attention," she noted, "our deeper purpose is to celebrate persistence, courage, and the power of truth to transcend time." Catherine Blackwell's botanical research, preserved and continued here, represents a scientific legacy that deserves recognition alongside her personal story. Her grandson Jonah's determined investigation, though it ultimately cost him his life, ensured that truth would eventually prevail over deception. As Eleanor prepared to conclude her remarks, she felt a profound sense of right alignment, as if all the disparate threads of her life had been woven together into a purpose that transcended her personal journey from grief to renewal. In preserving Oakwood Valley, she said, we honor not just architectural craftsmanship or agricultural heritage, but the human capacity to seek truth, to innovate despite obstacles, and to leave a legacy that enriches future generations. As we cut this ribbon today, we open not just a historical site or business, but a living testament to persistence, courage, and the enduring power of truth. The applause that followed seemed to echo across the restored grounds, rolling across the lavender fields and returning to embrace the gathering like a blessing. Victoria stepped forward with oversized ceremonial scissors, inviting Eleanor, her children, and Margaret Blackwell Hayes to join her for the official ribbon cutting. As the ribbon fell away and cheers erupted from the crowd, Eleanor felt a sense of completion unlike anything she had experienced before. The journey that had begun with a desperate bid at a county auction had led to this moment of community celebration, historical recognition, and personal transformation. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of guided tours, lavender product, demonstrations, and conversations with visitors whose enthusiasm confirmed the significance of what they had accomplished. Many were moved to tears by the hidden room exhibit, while others spent extended time studying Catherine's botanical journals and the displays explaining her agricultural innovations. By evening, as the last visitors departed and the staff gathered for a celebratory dinner in the restored dining room, Eleanor found herself overwhelmed with gratitude. Victoria raised her glass in a toast, her normally reserved demeanor softened by evident pride. To Eleanor Reed, she began, who saw potential where others saw only decay, who pursued truth when others would have accepted convenient fiction, and who has created something here that will enrich this community for generations to come. And to Catherine and Jonah Blackwell, Eleanor added, raising her own glass, whose courage and persistence across generations made this moment possible. Later that night, after the celebrations concluded and the property settled into peaceful darkness, Eleanor found herself drawn once more to the lavender fields. The spring night was mild, filled with the whisper of gentle breezes through emerging lavender plants and the distant call of night birds from the surrounding woodlands. Standing amid the orderly rows that Catherine had originally designed, nearly a century earlier, Eleanor felt a profound sense of connection across time to the remarkable woman whose scientific work she was continuing, to the historic property they had saved from destruction, and to future generations who would learn from and be inspired by the complete story now preserved at Oakwood Valley. The farmhouse stood silhouetted against the starry sky, its restored dignity a testament to perseverance and vision. No longer abandoned, no longer concealing dark secrets, it had begun a new chapter as a place of education, inspiration, and living history. 1 year earlier, Eleanor had been a widow struggling to find direction after loss, risking her limited resources on what had seemed an impossible dream. Now she stood as the steward of a nationally recognized historical site, and the leader of a thriving enterprise that honored the past while building toward a sustainable future. The hidden room that had changed everything, transforming a simple property restoration into a quest for justice spanning generations, had yielded far more than evidence in a long, cold case. It had become the catalyst for Eleanor's own transformation, from tentative widow to confident leader, from cautious archivist to bold preservationist, with the courage to fight for historical truth and significance. As moonlight silvered the emerging lavender plants around her, Eleanor thought of Catherine Blackwell, working these same fields decades earlier, observing, experimenting, innovating, and documenting her discoveries with scientific precision. Despite the tragic end to her life, Catherine's legacy had ultimately prevailed. Her botanical innovations lived on in the distinctive lavender variety, now thriving again under careful stewardship. Her courage in documenting corporate fraud had finally brought justice, though decades after her death. Some truths could be buried for years, beneath floorboards, beneath carefully constructed deceptions, beneath overgrown fields, but with persistence and care, they eventually found their way into the light. Eleanor had discovered this not just in the dramatic revelations of the Blackwell case, but in her own journey of renewal and purpose. As she turned back toward the farmhouse, its windows glowing with welcoming light against the darkness, Eleanor felt a certainty that transcended the challenges ahead. Oakwood Valley's restoration wasn't just about buildings or fields or even solving a famous mystery. It was about honoring truth across generations, recognizing that what we build, what we document, what we stand for, these things matter and endure long after we ourselves are gone. The hidden room that had started their journey had revealed not just evidence but a philosophy for living, that persistence in pursuing truth, however long delayed, ultimately serves justice. That courage in standing against corruption, however personally costly, creates ripples across generations. And that seeing potential where others see only decay can transform not just abandoned properties, but human lives as well. These were the true treasures Eleanor had discovered at Oakwood Valley, not hidden behind wainscoting or buried beneath stone angels, but revealed in the very process of reclaiming what others had abandoned and bringing long-forgotten truths back into the light where they belonged. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.